Good evening, and welcome to Laguna Beach Historical Society, our 5th program this year. We're so excited to have everyone here tonight, and we're so excited to have our viewers out through Cox Television this evening. And I would like to thank the Board of Directors of the Laguna Beach Historical Society for always supporting and encouraging new programs, for the volunteers that assist with us every week to keep the Murphy Smith Bungalow open to the public, and to our membership, our business members, and our family members for supporting us in our programs and always providing us with new ideas for programs and photographs for us to scan into our archives that can continue to expand. I'd like to thank our City Council for supporting us each year with a grant that helps us maintain the Murphy Smith Bungalow and helps us pay for the rent to take on programs such as this evening. I'd also like to thank Cox Television for organizing this and helping us archive this really important dialogue this evening. We're very excited about this, and I would particularly like to thank our board member, Jean Felder, who is sitting at the screen, for being so gracious and pulling together the PowerPoint that supports this program this evening. And with that, I would like to invite board member Eric Jessen to take over and introduce the speakers, the panel this evening. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Chalice opened the Studio Gallery, which was later renamed Chalice Gallery, in 1950. First art gallery. Prior to that, arriving in Laguna Beach in 1946, Chalice rented space for a frame shop from Councilman and Temple Hills developer Harold Reed. Reed owned the property where Ralph's Market is now at Clio Street and South Coast Boulevard. The first paintings displayed were by Laguna Impressionist Virginia Woolley. According to former Mayor Ann Christoph, Laguna home companion, at the time, Reed ran an ice house and a fruit and vegetable stand. Chalice would convert the vegetable stand into a frame shop, buy Reed's framing equipment, and pay rent, $60 a month. Eugene Crane is a significant art collector. California Holiday, the E. Jean Crane Collection, was a major art exhibition at the Laguna Art Museum in 2002. The Crane Collection includes artists known as the California School, including Rex Brandt, Phil Dike, and Millard Sheets. The collection began in the early 60s when Crane met artist Rex Brandt at the artist's home in Corona del Mar. And our program this evening will be moderated by Laguna Beach Art Museum Curator of Collections, the eminent Janet Blake. And if I may suggest, for those, we certainly welcome comments and questions, but in order to do so, we ask that you step forward to the lectern. And if you're just a whole bunch of you just dying to say something, well, then please line up so that we don't lose time, because we are being broadcast live on C-SPAN this evening, the C-SPAN channel at least. Cox. Thank you.
Janet? Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is give you a little brief history to remind everybody who may not be aware of the early history of Laguna Beach and how it developed into an art colony. I also want to add that I think part of the reason I'm the moderator is because since 1981 I've been the curator for Mr. Crane. And so it was through him that I met many other people in the art world and slowly but surely developed a specialty in California art history of the early 20th century. Jean has a slide up here, which you can read pretty well, that talks about the development of Laguna Beach as a little community. And you'll see there, it says Norman St. Clair visits Laguna Beach in 1900. Norman St. Clair was actually an architect who lived in Los Angeles, and his wife was at an optician's or an ophthalmologist's office and overheard a couple ladies talking about Laguna Beach and how wonderful it was. And she went home and told her husband, and he came down here, which in order to do so, you took the train to El Toro and then the stagecoach down to the town. And he came down here and made some paintings of the community and actually exhibited them. So he's probably one of the first artists to seriously paint here. However, we have learned that as early as about 1894 or 95, William Wendt and George Gardner Simons came out here to paint. And in fact, in 1903, Simons built a little studio cottage on lots that he'd purchased with his father. And for many years, Simons went back and forth from New Jersey to Laguna Beach. So that was the picture of Norman St. Clair. By 1915, Laguna Beach was pretty firmly established as a mecca for artists. By that time, Frank Kuprian lived here, Anna Hills lived here, William Swift Daniel did. Other artists had little studios that they'd come down to from the Los Angeles area, and they included Benjamin Brown, Jean Mannheim, Donna Schuster, Franz Bischoff. And Wendt bought lots from Simon's father, and he had been living in Los Angeles with his wife, Julia Bracken Wendt, who was a sculptor. And he finally built a home for them here in 1918. Now, by that time, the artists were kind of just, opening their studios to visitors and selling works that way. But they felt that maybe they needed to do something more substantial and as a group. Edgar Payne had moved into the area in 1917, and so he recognized the need for a community art gallery. And so this little pavilion, which you could go back and show it again, it was a little one-room pavilion on the grounds of the Hotel Laguna, and it had been used as a Sunday school, a meeting room, like a town hall. They think that perhaps there was an art exhibit there at one time of students. But Payne prevailed upon Joseph Yock, who owned the hotel. Could the artists have the pavilion to use as a gallery? And so he gave them permission, and the artists themselves began to remodel it in order for it to serve as an art gallery. Words passed through the community, through the minutes of the city council, and they started getting donations from other artists, citizens, and even summer visitors. Payne hosted a planning meeting at his home, and in July of 1918, they began working in earnest. It took them about 2 weeks, and the little structure was transformed. If you want to see what it really kind of looks like, you can come up to Laguna Art Museum and go up to the top, the third floor. There's a little model that was built in the 1930s, which is a wonderful model that shows the interior, and in it are miniature paintings and little figures of some of these early artists. And actually, some of the paintings are genuine miniatures that were made by the artists themselves. The way they remodeled it was that they took out the windows along the sides, popped up the roof, and put the windows up there so it served as a skylight. Then they boarded over where the windows were, and then they covered it with some kind of paper and so forth. And they wired it for electricity. And Payne's wife, Elsie, who was an artist herself, made a hand-lettered sign that simply said, Art Gallery, which was installed out front. The total cost of this remodel, anybody out here who's a builder will appreciate this, was $300. So, and we have a couple first-person accounts of the activities, most notably from Frank Kuprian and also from William Griffith, who was one of the presidents of the Art Association. Frank recalled their work in an article published in the Los Angeles Times. Quote, in the summer of 1918, we fixed up the ramshackle old building with the assistance of Nick Ish. Now, Nick was the brother-in-law to Joseph Yock, And Nick is actually the grandfather of Jane Jans, who may be in the audience, I'm not sure, but she's a very active historian in Laguna. Kuprian said, first we drove the bats out of the building. Then we built a skylight in the roof. We whitewashed the walls and oiled the floors. Later on, we had a sewing bee with all the ladies of the town present and covered the walls with burlap. Everybody worked like Trojans. So they had their first exhibition on July 27, 1918. 25 artists were represented with 100 works. Within 3 weeks, and we have documentation on this in the archives of the museum, over 2,000 people visited the gallery. So this prompted them to say, well, if we're going to keep this going, we need an art association to do so, some kind of organization. So on August 20th of 1918, Edgar and Elsie Payne, Frank Kuprian, William Wendt, Emily White, Anna Hills, Roy Clarkson Coleman, and Conway Griffith met at the gallery to discuss creating an art association that would allow the gallery to be a permanent institution. Anna Hills became the temporary chairman, and a constitution was drafted adopting the name of the organization as the Laguna Beach Art Association. Article 2 stated that the object of the Art Association is as follows. 1, to maintain a permanent art gallery. 2, to advance the knowledge and interest in art and to create a spirit of cooperation and fellowship between painter and public. Sounds like what a gallery might do, right, Richard? And 3, as often as possible, to have lectures or talks by visiting artists, writers, musicians, and others of note, given at our Saturday night receptions. See, the Art Association not only included visual artists, it included writers and musicians as well. They often had like poetry readings on Saturday night. They had 2 classes of membership, active and honorary. Active members were both artists and laymen who paid annual dues of $1. Officers included a president, selected from the resident artists, a first vice president, who also had to be a resident, second vice president, lay member, secretary, treasurer, and a custodian who would manage the gallery. Payne was elected the first president, and Anna Hills the vice president. They scheduled monthly exhibitions. Each exhibition would have a jury appointed by an advisory committee consisting of officers and other members. Resident artists could have 2 large, no larger than 28 by 36 inches, 2 large paintings and 2 small paintings, which would be no larger than 10 by 14. And these are typical little paintings that they often did en plein air, you know, and just real quick sketches. The initial enrollment had 150 members, of which 35 were artists. More than half the membership were residents of Los Angeles and vicinity. But according to Anna Hills, quote, very naturally belonged to us because of frequent sketching trips to our then quaint little village. This she wrote in 1929. In 1932, William Griffith gave a radio address over KFI, and he recalled this early times in Laguna Beach. Those were happy days. The art gallery was the center of all social activities, and numerous were the parties, lectures, and contests held there. We needed a piano, so artist Max Wazorek gave a painting for which Louis Dans traded for a piano. And you can see that piano in the model, and in that photograph that Jean had earlier, you can see the piano in the foreground with the drape on it. That's the piano. Griffith said there was a spirit of fellowship in the whole community. When William Wendt returned from a year in Europe in November 1927, the whole village turned out to welcome him home with a parade and a banquet. The Laguna Beach Art Association was incorporated in 1920. It was broadly oriented toward visual arts, music, and drama. Committees were established for all areas of interest. Joseph Yock allowed the association to use the little pavilion building rent-free until late 1922. At that time, they initiated an entrance fee to help pay the rent of 10 cents. The curators or custodians were volunteers, and weekly receptions were held on Saturday nights. Kuprian later recalled, just get back. That's a fast-forward hint of what's coming. Anyway, Kuprian said everybody realized the gallery was the cultural center of the community and that it must be supported. Everybody worked for it without animosity or argument. Each resident took his turn as a volunteer curator. Every Saturday night was open house at the gallery. Lagunans groped their way down the narrow, dark streets, lighted lanterns in their hands. On cold nights, they brought their own oil stoves. Even on the stormiest of nights, a few of us plowed through the mud, stoves and lanterns in our hands, and kept the gallery going in case anyone should wander in. We were determined to keep it going. We knew what it would mean to the future of the town, and that's a very key statement. The reputation of the artists and their association grew quickly. As prominent residents, the artists were active in both shaping the economy and helping direct the growth of the community as an art colony. The little village now had more than its natural beauty as an attraction for tourists. Tourists knew they could easily avail themselves of what the artists had to offer, both at the gallery, which I may remind you, they did sell the work, and in their studio homes, which they often opened to visitors in the summer months. More artists soon moved into the area. I discovered a letter in the archives from William Griffith to William Went, in which he said to him, "I trust you took advantage of Umbrella Week." And maybe somebody here remembers what Umbrella Week was. "Hot days we had and made snappy beach scenes. Wish summer were over and rain in sight to freshen up the hills and dust-bedraggled sycamores." I should correct myself. I believe that was Went writing to Griffith. The city's Chamber of Commerce, established in the mid-teens, made a decision to foster the artist identity for the community, emphasizing beauty, culture, and high class of people who visited. They specifically did not want to have a pier with a Ferris wheel and that kind of activity. They were going to be a more cultural community. Laguna Life began publication in 1915. By 1921, it was dedicated to art and nature. The paper often reprinted articles from East Coast publications about Laguna Beach and its artists. In 1924, there was an article in See America First called The Artist Mecca, and it stated that Laguna Beach Art Association was one of the most important groups in the West. Membership open to all art lovers, and all artists who are members and who at some time have painted at Laguna may exhibit their pictures. And of course, by the way, the exhibitions that they did have were juried. They did have jurors. They would select 3 people to be jurors, and so the paintings had to pass the jury to be exhibited. The art gallery was open from 1 to 5 p.m. every day except Christmas. Cash prizes were awarded for each monthly exhibition. Every August, beginning in 1920, they had an anniversary exhibition. The art gallery guest books have signatures of visitors from all over the United States and Europe, and these 2 are in the archive of Laguna Art Museum. The association also took very seriously the importance of arts education. Beginning about 1921, association artists donated works to the Laguna Beach schools, and the art gallery exhibited student work. The association formed a committee to assist with instruction because the school district had no art teacher. Students visited the gallery to hear lectures on art. They also organized exhibitions that were sent outside of Laguna Beach, including ones to the Orange County Fair. And in addition, they maintained continuous changing exhibitions at St. Anne's Inn in Santa Ana. The 1920s proved to be a period of rapid growth and development for the community and the Art Association. And almost from the beginning, they planned to build a permanent fireproof gallery. The little wooden gallery, of course, was in a grove of eucalyptus trees. In 1921, they accepted a design for a structure from the architect Myron Hunt. Anna Hills, in the 1920s, was president on 3 different occasions, and she not only was a wonderful artist, she was a great leader as well. And she was chairman of the Building Fund Committee, and William Went, Eleanor Colburn, and Thomas Hunt made up the Site Selection Committee. They quickly dismissed the idea of building it in the canyon, a wise move. In the spring of 1923, Howard Heisler offered to them the property at the corner of Old Coast Road and Cliff Drive. It was valued at $4,000. And he essentially sold them the land and took back a mortgage for $2,000 and donated $2,000. So they had a $2,000 mortgage on the land. Anna Hill said, "All Lagunites are looking forward to this art gallery as an institution which for all time shall add its influence and service to the community and to the world at large in the encouragement of the finer expressions of human activity." They began fundraising in earnest, had musical performances, lectures. They had an Indian pageant in 1921. By 1926, they'd paid for the land, and then they intensified their fundraising efforts to raise $10,000 to build the building. In July 1927, they realized $4,400 at St. Anne's dinner and reception, an auction of what they called little paintings, these little 10 by 14s. The 10th anniversary exhibition at the Pavilion Gallery, there wasn't enough space for the art, and so they displayed 24 paintings at the hotel as well. They broke ground for the new gallery in August 1928, and thanks to Tom Pulley, we have an image of the building under construction. And you can see that center large gallery, which has a skylight in the roof, and if you come up to the museum and go into what we call the steel gallery, that's that gallery. So that's still original to the original building. Construction was completed, and they opened their first exhibition at the gallery on February 16, 1929, to lots of fanfare from the city of Laguna Beach. They renamed 4 streets after the leading artist. And Griffith, in his radio address, looked back on this. It was just 3 years earlier that they'd opened. He said, "Our gallery is the first unit of a more elaborate plan. The interior is one of the best lighted galleries to be found in the state." Of course, what he hadn't noticed yet was that the skylight kept leaking. And Anna Hills wrote to the architect. There's a wonderful letter that's in the archives where she's writing to him about the leaking skylight, and how she's also consulted with the director of the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, which had a similar construction. And he gave her some suggestions, and she said, "We tried all these suggestions, but it leaks merrily on," which I thought was pretty funny. But we've had problems with the skylight, too. So he then said, "What has been built is well done of solid reinforced concrete, and our architects, Hunt and Chalmers, have plans for a more elaborate exterior with other galleries and a patio where work on sculpture may be shown. We have an unfinished basement, which we hope to finish in the future to show prints. The basement was finished in 1934. The present building has now been in use for 4 years, and today when you drive south on the new State Highway, you come into a much larger and more modern Laguna. Don't drive too fast. We now have speed cops, and you might pass us by. For on the cliff, just before going downgrade in the business section of the town, stands a large concrete building, in front of which is the familiar Auto Club sign marked Art Gallery. I don't know if it was the same sign that Elsie Payne had made or not." He continued, "Stop. There's a large parking place on the ocean front," which of course is now Las Brisas. "As many as 17,000 other people have stopped within 1 year to visit our gallery." In the future, in 1951, they enlarged the building. The Art Association continued to sell paintings all the way up into the 70s. This was a way they could raise funds to keep it going. And it even sold paintings after they had changed the name in 1972 to Laguna Beach Museum of Art. In 1985, the name of the gallery, now museum, was changed again to Laguna Art Museum, and of course in the fall of 1986 they opened the very elaborately remodeled building that you see today. The community today still carries some of the charm of those early days. You can drive around and see a lot of homes that are just pretty much the same way they were. The little pavilion gallery was actually moved and is now an extension to a home that Rick Balzer can give you the address for, and he's in the audience. So that's what happened to it. And so then more galleries started coming in, perhaps, and the most notable being Richard. And Richard began with a frame shop, and I will turn it over to him to continue.
I might mention, Richard,
Thank you
the
so
image up
very
here
much.
is from, look at the image, because I've snuck this in on you. I found it. So this is the Rose Bowl float that Harold Reed was responsible for making?
Yes, it was Harold Reed that got me into this business. I'll enter right into the fact that I came from England, obviously, and I had been a staff officer at Kensington Palace Barracks, and took the first Pan-American plane I could get, which took about 9 months to get a seat on it. It was one of those beautiful Constellation planes that Howard Hughes had in his line, and it seated 56 people. Now, wasn't that nice? And when I arrived, I found the aunt to whom I was going to visit was extremely ill. She had osteomyelitis, and I had planned to go to college, continue college. I'd only done 2 years of college in England before the army took me. And so I decided to stay in Laguna. One of her friends was Harold Reed. And he had a very pretty daughter who made ceramics. Now, Janet hasn't mentioned that we had an industry in Laguna Beach during the war, and it was the ceramic industry. There were about 8 or 9 potteries, Brayton and many others, also one in Corona del Mar, and they sold knickknacks. Wall sconces, dinnerware, because during the war, the population made money that they'd never seen before, and there was nothing to buy. So Laguna did extremely well selling ceramics. And when I came in 1946, the industry was still going fairly strong, and there was the Art Association. Now, the Art Association was created to help artists sell paintings. And I've got to tell you that membership was a huge sum of $2. And they did extremely well, and as Janet has just told you, it was somewhere in '72 that it became a museum. And so, therefore, the artists didn't have places to exhibit their works. And I thought, well, maybe I could show some paintings in the little frame shop that I decided to operate. I knew nothing about framing. And I had this vegetable stand that Harold Reed said, well, you could make that into a stand, a little studio. It only had one wall, and I had to build the walls, the frontage and everything. And one of the walls was long and white, and people would come by and say, what was going to happen here? And I said, well, it's going to be a frame studio. Harold Reed told me that he framed the works of the famous painters such as William Went and Couprian. We know them all. They're all listed. And he did the framing through the Depression, and he survived in the Depression. And the fact that he had survived in the Depression indicated to me I might be able to make a go of it. I opened on the 1st of June in 1946. I had only just finished putting the windows in the glass. I hadn't yet made a frame. And yet business came to my door to such an extent that I had to employ people who knew even less than myself. But I managed to muddle my way through, and I never had a work that we created returned. We used to do elaborate carving, and Harold Reed taught me gold leafing, and it was interesting. And people said, well, you've got that lovely white wall, why don't you hang pictures on it? And one of the first artists to come along was Virginia Woolley, and also an artist called Bennett Bradbury. And Bennett Bradbury painted seascapes. Now, seascapes are a touchy subject, because I will tell you that sometime in the 60s there was a long article in the Los Angeles Times indicating that Laguna consisted of a lot of little shops selling seascapes. And they looked down on Laguna Beach. And it is really only in the last 10 years or so that we have pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and made a name for Laguna Beach as a center where genuine fine art can be found. And Harold Reed would only let me have, we wouldn't let me have a lease. And finally, I moved to 1350 on South Coast Boulevard, and committed myself to a mortgage, which I just wondered how on earth I would be able to pay. But here I'm going to add something about Laguna that touches in the period that Janet has been talking about, and that is that there was no coast highway. There was no bridge at Aliso. The bridge at Aliso was built in 1926, and then they started excavating. And if any of you know my old gallery, you'll know that you have to come up about 14 steps to the natural level of the land, and the road was excavated down to the level that it is now, where it now sports the infamous ex-Boom Room and the Coast Inn. And as I committed myself to buy this property, I found that it was ideal for a little apartment in the back, so I built on the back a storeroom, which eventually became an apartment, and I there reside in peace in my old age, looking at the pelicans fly by, and I find it very soothing and away from all the frustrations of running a gallery. I closed the gallery or tried to change its ownership in 1984. That was an early time to retire. I was only 64 then, but frankly, my health from hanging millions of paintings was deteriorating, and I just decided to pass it on to my secretary, who was Mrs. Olson. And I've got to tell you that to this day, she has left a legacy of a lovely family, Lamayas, who live in Laguna, in San Juan Capistrano. And it is Alison, who is my dear friend, who looks after me in my decrepitude. And she does it so genuinely, I wanted to bring her name up. Well, anyway, thanks to Gene. Now, first I've got to thank Gene. He put an enormous amount of time in coming and picking through boxes of paraphernalia and documents, and shows you a picture now of one of the brochures we produced. And right now you're looking at the work of Ray Fries, whom I represented in the 1960s and who we lost only, I think, last year. You'll find my talk tonight is a little muddled, but that's part of getting old. You don't keep a straight and narrow connection. But at least I've got through that Laguna used to be a very lovely little town. And it still is a lovely little town, but it was quaint. There was no water, and in the turn of the century there was no electricity. There were a couple of wells, but mainly they had to cart the water in. The main entry into Laguna Beach was through the Canyon Road, and you'll see an article in the folder, if you've got the folder that Gene so adequately produced. It talks about a gentleman who provided transportation on an old truck that's maximum speed was 10 miles an hour, and you can imagine coming through the canyon on rutted dirt roads to Laguna. But people came to Laguna, and they loved to camp during the summer, and all where we now have our window to the sea were tents. And later they built a ballroom, and you may have noticed on some postcards that there are signs of dancing, ballroom dancing. And that went on until about 1946, and then they turned it into a bowling alley. And then we had the city council decide that it was time to buy that frontage. Now, I want to put a word in here for who paid for that, because it was $26 million. And that was a lot of money. And I have to tell you that the City Council arranged that the Festival of Arts profits would be used to pay that off. And it was paid off, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, so we have much to thank the Festival of Arts and its board of directors. One of the board of directors was Mr. Roy Ropp. I represented him. His art was I don't like to be critical, but fair. And he was the one that you want to remember as starting the Festival of Arts. And he started the Festival of Arts. I wish my daughter was here because she could give me the... She is there? When did she start the Festival of Arts?
Roy started the pageant of the Masters. He directed the one in 1935.
In 1935. And it grew and grew until Williamson designed the bowl as you see it now, and it has now got to a stage where they need funds for renovation. But of course, in my opinion, the profits from the pageant of the Masters should have gone to upkeep and maintenance of the Festival of Arts. And here I can put this in, it's nothing to do with art galleries, but many of the artists survived very well on the great crowds that came to the pageant of the Masters. And there was one time that I was asked to be a censor. And I said, no, that's a censor. Why? I was a censor. And in those days, this was in the 60s, audiences were a little uptight, and if there were any suggestion of any genital area exposed, or even one single pubic hair, it would be banned. And certain artists were banned, so they decided to have a censorship parade, a censorship body, which consisted of Andy Wing, whom we lost recently, and yours truly, which is probably more infamous, because I remember exhibiting works where a certain gentleman who wanted to impose himself as a censor in Laguna came by to see whether the works that I had put in the window were too suggestive. But times have changed. And we get along now with complete nudity done in a tasteful manner. And after all, when you think, what is the ideal subject for a painter to work on? Landscape or the figure? And you will find the figure was very, very popular in Grecian times. And here I'm going to tell you that, do you realize what the oldest profession in the world is? It's not what you think it is, ladies. It is painting or drawing. We go back 2.5 million years when rough-looking people with shaggy hair were scrawling drawings on walls of caves, and thus told us in these days what sort of animals there were. And so, in other words, history is absolutely entwined with art. So those of you who are artists here, you are carrying on the tradition of writing history by applying some tool and making a picture of the subject that you see. And so I like to think that art galleries are extremely important in educating people to different styles of art. Now, the Los Angeles Times article took both sides, but mainly I have to tell you that the establishment, the art establishment, which is the universities, the reviewers of important newspapers, and the schools, look down on art that isn't original, and they think it's a lot of people copying other people and painting seascapes. And so really Laguna got quite a bad name, even though it had one of the finest galleries in 1928. And not only was it fine, very wisely, it was built a fireproof structure, and it did wonders. And as I mentioned, it was only $2 to be a member, and entrance was free. Isn't that so, Janet?
Well, they did, pardon me, they did charge something because
Oh,
they
they
started
did.
having
They did.
expenses, yeah.
Well, they had to raise funds, and thank goodness, during that period of time, here in Laguna, it was a lovely little town of 4,500 people. We're now talking about early 46, 45. There were a lot of people coming to town, especially those who'd been on service in El Toro and wanting to live in this town. And gasoline was 23 cents. And there were, get this, 10 automobile dealers in Laguna Beach. Now, would you believe that? Including Alan, who is still in business in Laguna Niguel. And we even had the Hudson Agency, which was on the corner of Crest Street. And we had numerous gas stations, 4 down on Broadway, 1 at each corner. And we also had a market at Crest Street, and the Hotel Del Camino, is that the one on Crest Street? I'm bad at names at this stage of my life. Had a pharmacy, and across from the pharmacy was a Safeway. So Laguna was a pocket city. We had everything. We had 5 hardware stores, and things have changed so much, but still it is a beautiful city. And I have here a note from a gallery, DeRue's gallery, that is so delightful and so expressive of what this town is that I'm asking you to allow me to read it to you. This is DeRue's Fine Arts, who offer works by Joseph Kleitsch, who, in my opinion, was the finest painter that ever crossed these lands. A local gallery is offering works by Joseph Kleitsch. He died in 1931, born 1881. He was Laguna's best artist, in my opinion. I tottered down to Bluebird to buy the $50 book published in 2007. Dee, my daughter, wanted it for the pageant collection, met the owner, looked at the prices. His Kleitsch's were priced up to $80,000. And now let me tell you the story of the auction that took place in 1953. He died in 1951, and his wife just shut the studio door, which was a mud floor, and just let his paintings rot. And she died penniless. But anyway, the then Art Association run by Ozzie Jackson was his name?
Yeah,
Ozzie Jackson.
Yeah.
He ran the auction, and the auction of 124 paintings sold for $5,012.24. Average $41 each. Now, let me go back to the present day, and we'll find midway in 1929, before he died, he was represented by the Stendhal Gallery in Los Angeles, very respected gallery. And he had a sale there, a one-man show. In 1929, of course, that wasn't a particularly good time, and sold nil, no art, none at all. And then later, luckily, the museum accepted quite a few Joseph Kleitsch's, and I also bought, I think, 3, which were in poor condition, and I restored. And then I decided that we better have a Kleitsch exhibition at the Festival of Arts. And in those days, in the Festival of Arts, in the 60s, we would have a national competition, and I think it was a very healthy idea. So we would get people entering works famous people entering works for competition and a fairly substantial prize. My daughter would be able to tell you what the prize was, I can't remember. But nevertheless, I showed 7 of his glorious paintings, and I showed them on the outside rim of the exhibition. The center part of the green at the festival grounds was enclosed into a separate exhibition of the results of this competition. How many did I sell? None whatsoever. And so also in the files, I don't know if they're in the files of the Art Museum, there is a letter from Mr. Kleitsch saying to Sandal, you haven't paid me for 3 months, please come up with some money.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes,
Yes, that's true.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's go on with this lovely little story. The works seldom sold for more than $250. I'm talking about this to tell you, getting into the fact of when to buy paintings and why to buy paintings, but I'm not there yet. Stendhal didn't sell a single work for him for 3 years before his death. And here am I saying I think he's the best painter. Jean owns one, and I believe he bought it in
Yes,
Laguna
he
Beach.
bought it from you.
Thank you. I fished for that one. All will be seen, and so we go on. All will be scenes from old Laguna Beach, painted before our present easeful days of good roads, good water, gas and electricity. Old Laguna compelled Lagunites to wade through mud and plow through dust, to import water, to cook with kerosene, to pant up the hills to fight the rattlesnakes, to hang over tottering rails while waiting for their mail. But oh, how beautiful old Laguna was, with its incomparable shoreline, its opalescent sea, its radiant hills. Nobody minded the dust and the mud. Brackish water and the reluctant kerosene for every man, woman, and child was drinking in beauty every day in every pore, and we were all happy. I'm saying you can still drink in this beauty. It is still a divine city. The only city you can compare it with is Carmel or La Jolla, and I think we're tops. They came in flocks, the artists. They painted early and late, they starved, they rejoiced, but they didn't actually die. Some of them, in fact, will live forever because they painted old Laguna in all its beauty. Aesthetically considered, too, many of them are invaluable. RBC comment, it said, I showed 10 of his works at the Laguna Festival and sold none. Going back to this article, Kleitsch painted the ancient shacks, gaunt hotels, sun-baked hills. He was Hungarian, was he not?
Yes.
And the dreamy sea because he found them beautiful. And so why is it wrong now in modern art to paint beauty? I'm now going to go back to a little encouragement to those who collect art. And if I can find my notes, which are sort of scattered all over the place here. Just take me a moment or two. Well, anyway, we'll go on.
You know, while you're looking, I could...
Picasso, $105 million. $105 million. Just recently, this is one of the problems I got to tell you about getting old. I'm in my 91st year. I don't exactly feel it, except at certain times, but one does find that trying to pick a name out of the blue sometimes is difficult. So we'll get to that later. So what I'm trying to tell you that if you really want to buy, to invest, you have to wait 40 years. And very shortly, Mr. Crane will tell you how and why. So I think you've listened to me for a while. I'm going to come back and tell you lots more. But I'm going to tell you that Rex Brandt, who is in Mallets, which was printed in 1928 with Millard Sheets, and with Phil Dyke in 1928, mark you, were listed as important artists in the United States of America. He walked into my gallery and asked me to show his work. I didn't invite him. And he, in turn, brought in Bill Dyke, George Post, Robert E. Wood, all great artists, but watercolorists. And I got to love watercolor, so I became some sort of an authority on watercolor. And so I'm now going to hand my this dissertation, which has gone on long enough, to Gene, who's going to tell you how he met Rexford Brandt.
Yeah, well, before I start, you've already anticipated one thing that I want to say. Nobody can appreciate the importance of Dick Chalice to the School of California Art, that he was so vital in encouraging and in selling during the years that he has been talking about. There's only one other person who had as much influence, I think, on California art as did Dick Chalice, and she happens to be here tonight. Her name is Ruth Westphal, and Ruth, in 1982, resurrected and made absolutely holy, along with the efforts of Joan Irvine, to show a series of California artists that painted literally from the birth of the state in 1849 through 1860 until the time came when they were the teachers of the artists about which I know. So here tonight, whether you know it or not, gang, you're sitting with two legends of California art. If it hadn't been for Ruth, I don't know how long it would have taken the California Impressionists to become important. If it hadn't been for Dick, I don't know how long it would have taken for these other gentlemen, the people and ladies, the people I'm going to give you a very few minutes talk on, to achieve the status that they have achieved. One final thing about Richard. He mentioned Stendhal Gallery, which was one of the great galleries in Los Angeles, had been for years, since almost the turn of the century, 3 or 4. Well, Richard sold more paintings by Roger Kuntz than Stendhal did, and Stendhal was his representative in Los Angeles. Richard, it's impossible to overstate the importance that Dick Chalice was to the art community, particularly the art community of people called the California School or California Watercolor School or what have you, that came along after the California Impressionists that were detailed in Ruth's book.
I'm not even deceased yet, Gene.
Richard mentioned that Rex Brandt. Rex was became a very close friend of mine. I first met Richard in 1961 when we were involved in a lawsuit, and I was representing one of his former wives at the time. And I was able to meet Richard, and we became very good friends and have remained friends for 50 years. Rex, I had no background whatsoever in art, none. I I graduated from law school in 1958 and worked for 2 years at a place right across the street from the Art Institute in Chicago, which is one of the world's great art museums. I didn't make very much money as a corporation lawyer, so I would spend some time at the Art Institute. And that was all that I knew about art until I came to California in 1961. And my landlord in Corona Del Mar did work for Rex Brand. He was a printer. He was Hendrix Printing. And I admired some of Rex's pieces on his wall. And he said, why don't you go over and see him? Well, I didn't have enough sense not to. So one Saturday about 1 o'clock, I just went over because I was told where he lived at the end of Goldenrod by the footbridge. I went over and knocked on the door, and Rex came, and I spent until 6 or 7:30 that night just talking with him, not knowing anything about art, but learning a great deal about people. I found that I wanted to know more about these artists. I hoped that it might be possible to get to know them better and to talk with them and to deal with them and to interact with them over a long period of time if I bought their damn paintings. So I would buy paintings from them hoping they would talk to me. I had some connection with Pomona College. I was a graduate of Pomona College, and many of these people, Millard, Phil Dyke, and a number of others, Roger Kuntz, Bob Wood, all of those people had a lot of connections with Pomona and with the Claremont colleges, so I used that connection. And I want to tell you that as well as these people painted, they were not people who were perpendicular in their approach to life. They were great thinkers. They were great philosophers, great poets, great writers. They had all kinds of terrific compositional ideas who chose a paintbrush and a sheet of white paper and some pigment to express their genius. These people were fortunate in one sense. And you say, well, Crane, how can you say they were fortunate? They came to life really in 1929 to 30 to 40s, and then the war came along. Wasn't there a big depression going on? Yes, there was, a huge depression, but somehow it didn't affect these people because they had gone on to art school, and then right out of the blue came Hollywood and the Mouse Factory. Disney would hire anybody, and so they all had jobs. They all worked, and they were all happy, and they were all young, and they were all in their salad days. And what they did, and what was important to me in what they did, was capture California before World War II and immediately after World War II. You got to remember that in World War II, when it came around, we not only had El Toro, as Richard mentioned, but we had Santa Ana Army Air Base, we had naval bases, we had Marine Base in Pendleton, we had Army bases in Los Angeles, we had just tons of service personnel coming through California. So Costa Mesa, which in 1942 had 1,000 people in it, Laguna Beach had maybe 4,000. Newport Beach had maybe permanent residents of 5,500. After the war, the people who were killed fighting said, I don't see any reason really to spend a winter in Buffalo. So back they came. But what had happened in the meantime, these artists who began their work in the late 20s and worked on until probably the late 70s, had captured California in a way that it was. And they captured it, in my view, by use of the medium of watercolor. Watercolor was perfect for California. Watercolor captured the air, the ocean, the sunlight, the sunshine Why, how else would you want to paint this lovely Shangri-La that didn't suffer the Depression as much, at least in these artists' minds? They were very, very, very talented people, and they would work for the studios during the day or at the colleges and the universities. They all had either university, college, or other jobs in education, or they worked for the studios. And in the weekends, they would go out and paint. I only met Emil Kosa twice. Once, Brant and I went up to his home, and he was a big person, a very, very good watercolorist, and it was evening, I recall, and I walked in with Rex very quietly, because Rex knew him pretty well. And there was Emil sitting there with a big palette in front of him, painting the heck out of a watercolor, a 2230 full sheet watercolor, just the happiest man in the world. He said, "Brant, you can't believe this." He said, "I can paint this thing, and I can do it in a couple of hours, and I can sell it for $100. And he thought that was the greatest thing going. And the only other time I saw him was when he was dying. Rex dragged me along up to his place in Brentwood to see him, and he was laying on his bed, and I'll never forget the occasion, because Rex made the proper goodbye statements, and I was quiet. And finally, Rex was about to leave, and Emil pulled him down right in front of him, pulled his face right next to Emil's, and Rex's face were right next to each other. And I'll never forget what Kosa said. He said, "Paint, Brant, paint. Don't ever stop painting." And Rex did that. There were two schools, really. The school that I've mentioned before, that Ruth Westphal, in her book, Plein Air Painters, the Southland, the Green Book, chronicled the people who started really working in California, the famous people who now get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece for their work. And behind them came the group of people in whom I have developed an interest. The Brants, the Dykes, the Sheets, the Kosas, the Millers. I mean, you can just go on. Milford Zorns was the oldest. They were all born in the very early 1900s. Think about that. California hadn't been a state for 70 years when these people were born. They all went into their work, into their salad periods in the late 20s, and painted through the 30s, painted landscapes, painted all kinds of things using the perfect media for painting, although I don't want you to get it wrong. They were all very skilled in other medium, oil, but basically they captured what was the essence of California in the days of their glory. They captured that essence using the most appropriate medium available for it. West Coast, watercolor. You want to go to the East Coast? It's cold in the winter. You pull your coat up over you and you paint oil paintings. Out here, the sunshine, the ocean, particularly the ocean before World War II, glimmering, classic. And these people were perfect to doing it, for making the paintings that they made. It's kind of interesting when you consider that California is not really a very old state. The founders of this, of the artists that I collect, they used mostly watercolor, and they came to be known and accepted really as called the California School. And it was highly regarded throughout the country. The leader was Millard Sheets because, frankly, he had the LA Times, and Tony Anderson and Arthur Milliere, the art critics, in his back pocket. They loved his work and praised him to high heavens. But they also praised Rex's work. Rex had a two-person show with Birchfield, who was an internationally known artist. His wife, Joan Irving, one of the most lovely people I've ever met, had a two-person show with Andy Wyeth. So these people were not amateurs in their work. They had a school, but it was really a school without a campus, without any kind of a doctrine. It was just a school of people, young people, people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, who liked each other, who gloried in the success that the others would have. No jealousy, no backbiting, no behind the hand saying of bad things. They were all very close, very friendly, in a very wonderful world. Zorns, Brandt, Tom Craig, Dyke, Sheets, and others of that generation founded this California school. They were the keys of watercolor painting in Southern California, and watercolor painting in Southern California became important to watercolor work, making it a meaningful artistic expression, not just a drawing, not just a sketch, but meaningful artistic work in their founding of the California Watercolor Society, which is now the National Watercolor Society. This school, without a campus, without a manifesto, without a charter, or without a center, but there existed within that school camaraderie, commonality, all expressed by the members of the society in their love, appreciation, and admiration for each other. They developed and showed this in their work, their lifestyles, their beliefs, love of land, sea, sunlight, sunshine. All these elements appear as if by instinct in their work of these people, these artists. It may have been there perhaps even before they were aware of the emotion. Their work clearly indicates a closeness to the land. They often eschewed familiarity with urban schemes. At every state throughout their long career, every stage throughout their long career, their art reveals their enthusiasm and their belief that life's journey was a constant search to discover new ways of expressing emotion. For these artists, success during their odyssey was made possible because of talent and skills. We, their audience, are rewarded and renewed by the results of these explorations. Through their work, they made available to all of us new ways of interpreting our surroundings. They help to install in each and every one of us reasons for living. As a collector, I'm delighted by and have an abiding appreciation and affection for their works. They always express their personal views of the world and, in their view, of the world's essence. These artists appear fully to have accomplished their goals. Thank you.
Jean, I don't deserve those beautiful remarks, but I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I just want to continue now I found my list for expensive paintings, those millionaires out there who want to buy in today's market. Liechtenstein, 42.6 million. It consisted of a sketch of a face with a phone to the ear. Warhol, as you know, famous for his Campbell's soup. 23.9 million. Modigliani, only 2 weeks ago, Modigliani, 68.9. And here I go back to my theory that the human form, especially if it is displayed in a somewhat risque manner, Modigliani would do that, but his abstraction was totally delightful, and he's one of my favorite painters of all time. But anyway, going back to art in the old days, do you know what is now used instead of the year of our Lord, A.D.? It is the Common Era. So, in other words, we use now B.C.E. means before the Common Era, and the Common Era is that of Jesus Christ, and it's sort of a shame that it is being lost, and a lot of people don't even know, but now you do know what that is. Just going back to Kleitsch, because I keep talking about it, he was also represented by Stendhal at the Ambassador Gallery. And he sold Kleitsch's for $250. Now they are cheapest, I think, probably about $60,000 to $80,000.
Yeah, some of the portraits are the
So
lowest price.
I don't know if Jean will permit me to say this, but it is public knowledge, if you know, that the Anderson essay with Jean is in the Smithsonian. And therein, 10 years ago when this interview took place, he owned 1,000 paintings. Now that's a lot of paintings. And the person who looks after them and lists them and has them probably all on computer is our Janet here.
Yes.
And a marvelous job it must be. How do you keep them in good condition? Do you mainly in storage, special storage?
Well, you know, Gene is a collector who doesn't want any of his art hidden away. So he has as few as possible that are hidden away, and many that are on view. He loans them very generously to close friends. There are 156 paintings at the law offices of Arella Manella in Newport Center, and there are paintings in the Center Club and paintings in various families' homes, and of course many, many paintings in his office in Newport Beach. He'll hang them salon style because he just wants them up. He wants to enjoy them, because what else would they be for? And you know, Richard represented artists that Gene had begun collecting, and records that I have show that he bought nearly 50 paintings from Richard, and some quite significant paintings. The first Brandt that he bought from Richard is a painting called Coast of Oregon, which is an American Watercolor Society prize winner. He also bought one of the most significant Phil Dike oil paintings from Richard called View of Los Angeles, which is in the American Scene Painting book, and it's Phil's view essentially of Chavez Ravine and looking toward the distant city. and it's a signature work. And when Richard talked about things getting higher in value, I'm sure that if Gene were to put that at auction, which is very unlikely he will do, it would command a pretty high price today, as do some of the others that he owns, that he purchased from
Gene
Richard.
don't sell paintings.
So here's an example
Collects.
of a successful art collector, and a very successful art collector, but also a man with an eye for art. I had very little professional training except in King's College School in Wimbledon, where we were taught art appreciation, and then I was taken to museums. And I got a taste, and of course I continued my education by handling these various artists. And it was thanks to Rex Brandt that Robert E. Wood came. I've got to tell you, that's not Robert Wood, who lived in the house adjacent to the Catholic Church on Temple Terrace. He was an artist who had a great talent for landscape and could turn out a good landscape in a matter of hours, and was frowned upon by the establishment as being a schlocker. Now, I've talked about the perils of art collecting, so that's an intro to what are the perils of art collecting. It's a mistake to buy art just because you see masses of other people buying that same artist's work. It's a mistake to buy art because you think it's fashionable. It's a mistake to buy art for over the sofa. You should buy art because it affects you deeply, that you see that this does something for you, and you realize that it is what work of perhaps a genius. And I consider that Phil Dyke was a genius, Rex Brandt, and a wonderful man who lived in San Francisco, George Post. Now, George Post will be seen if you go to the Wikipedia. I don't know if you go to the Wikipedia. I do, and I check my figures through Wikipedia. There is now an appeal on Wikipedia saying that it is so costly that he may have to make charges. And he's currently, I've forgotten his name, appealing for funds. When you next go on Wikipedia, you will see that appeal. But so, buy art that you're not buying because it's going to increase in value. Gene did not buy with an idea of investment. He bought because of a passion.
Right.
And that is what he has done. And every time he buys another piece, he savors it. It gets his juices going. And there are a few like that. But the people who buy the art that I was looking at here on my list of a Modigliani for 68.9, that's the highest ever. And here we are, an extreme recession, and yet there are people out there who can afford these fantastic prices. There will always be rich people. There will always be people.
Maybe it went to China.
Well, no, I don't think necessarily. I still think America has the largest number of billionaires. Millionaires doesn't mean a thing now.
Yeah, true.
And so what I've got to say is that Joseph Kleitsch, whom I keep harping on, was at the Ambassador Hotel. And I'll put in a little aside that's totally unrelated to art about my own life's experience. My third customer at my little studio in Sleepy Hollow was William Grant Sherry. And William Grant Sherry came in one day and wanted very elaborate framing made, which was far beyond my capability, but I muddled my way through. And he said, "Oh, you've got to come and meet my wife." And I said, "Oh, fine, I'll come for cocktails at 6. So I went up to 1991 Ocean Way and entered this lovely old pseudo-Tudor house right on the ocean. Went downstairs and met his wife, who at that time was knitting and taking a sip of scotch between rows and sitting on a stool, and it was Betty Davis. And I was then invited to dinner and then invited to squire her sister, which was a lovely experience. And she was a wonderful lady. She didn't get any credit for Betty's success. She was Betty's slave. And, but anyway, at that time, this was in 1947, was invited to all the places, and one of my memories of almost being important was dancing with Betty Davis at the Rainbow Room at the Ambassador Hotel. And we'd go to places like Ciro's, and it was quite a different world then. But nevertheless, I became a sort of a family retainer and had to go and meet her at the San Bernardino railway station because she hated to fly at that time. But it is extraordinary how you Turner classic movies, which I enjoy because it reminds me of my youth. And there she is, still one of the most famous actresses who lived here in Laguna for, about 4 or 5 years. She paid $80,000 for that house. She put another $60,000 in it and sold it for $84,000. So that tells you that she wasn't a very good businesswoman. But I, being a friend of William Grant Sherry, who later married the nursemaid, and it's very interesting to know how Betty selected her nursemaid. We had a lovely stationery store on Forest Avenue, and there was a young woman of 21 serving there, and Betty went up to her and she liked the looks of her, and she said, "Would you like to look after my 1-year-old child, Beadie?" And this lady said yes, and she worked for some time, and then I became embroiled in various affairs of the heart, and Betty then eventually became enamored with Gary Merrill, and the nursemaid married Sherry, and they lived reasonably happily ever after. But it was fun, a young 26-year-old guy meeting a famous person and then sort of being looked at when you entered a ballroom just because with whom you were dancing or walking. That's a little aside. You may think after hearing Jean that I should be an extremely wealthy person. I want to put that idea at rest right away. There were times when literally we had some pretty poor years. I never made a loss, but I sometimes made very little. I put down somewhere in the front here a typical catalog, and this catalog is of a watercolorist called Richie E. Benson. And he was an extraordinarily successful painter and died of a heart attack in his 50s, and I missed him tremendously. He would paint for me 130 paintings at least, put them in a large van, and with his wife drive down from Mercer Island, that's in Washington State, and drive all night and all day and deliver these 136 paintings, and I will tell you that nearly everyone sold. So yes, one can find an artist that is popular, especially with the uneducated in art. I feel that some of the very modern painters, and we talked about Warhol, it's more a fashion to own the work of a very famous painting, which means what makes an artist famous, and that's one word: promotion. And I promoted in my small way to an audience that was, say, middle class, and to whom I extended credit with no interest, and produced these expensive catalogs. And that particular catalog that I've left there for you to pick up, which will give the address of the old gallery, which is now called the Esther Wells Collection. That was one of my big mistakes. When I put 36 years of work into that gallery, I put an ad in the Los Angeles Times that Richard Chalice was retiring and offered his gallery for sale or lease. In the Los Angeles Times, the publication was 1.3 million. How many returns did I get? 2. And one of them was from Esther Wells, who had a gallery in Calabasas and also had one on Catalina Island. And she came in and she insisted on having the Esther Wells sign put up, which threw away all the product of building confidence in the clientele. But when she came in, she didn't buy the place. I just handed over the gallery as it was, with its mailing list, which was most valuable, and also the what I used to call the Holy Bible, which was the list of all the buyers and the artists and the name of the painting sold. And she threw away most of my files. But then the Smithsonian asked for my records, thanks to the recommendation by Tom Enman, an earlier director of the Art Museum. And I was able to supply them with a certain number, and Jean Crane's entire interview is there at the Smithsonian. And so she got the advantage. But I cannot have recriminations, because she's now in that studio in the sky, and I can't say bad things about her. But the gallery is now run by her then assistant, who is Charlie Ferrazzi. And I have to give her a compliment or two, because she runs the gallery when I had a secretary and 2 or 3 helpers. She does it alone. But you may say, how on earth does she do it? Well, there isn't the business now. And she still puts on shows. She put on a show for another watercolorist that we haven't mentioned tonight, who is Gerald Brommer. And Gerald Brommer lives in North Hollywood, and I found his work in a gallery in Pasadena when he was a more contemporary artist, no, a more modern artist. He abstracted and made cubistic forms of his landscapes. He's now gone back to more realism and literal landscapes. But he is 83 years old. He still travels around the world with students, training watercolorists, just as Rex Brandt did. And he taught thousands of students through his school on Marguerite in San Juan, in Corona del Mar.
No, yeah, Goldenrod.
On Goldenrod,
Yeah.
Goldenrod.
You know, I was thinking that, looking at the time and everything, maybe some people in the audience would like to ask questions.
Well,
Might stimulate
Janet, if
more.
I may at least clear up this thing about, I said there were perils,
Okay.
because I just tossed the idea of this title to Gene, and he took it up, and then the printer accidentally put an apostrophe after "it's," not realizing that I wasn't saying "it is." I was just referring to "it's." But these little things get in the printer, and that is why it's so important to proofread. But anyway, I had problems with a big 5,000 edition of an article I wrote on David Roberts, who was a famous lithographer who went to the Holy Land before the coming of the photography for outdoor use. There was the wet plate, and the wet plate photography was very cumbersome and very dangerous. But anyway, now just my one little thing about the perils. Don't buy junk art. Now you may say, what is junk art? I will tell you, Janet knows the painter Italo D'Andrea. He was a genius. He had great, great art. I haven't got a picture of his here. That happens to be Will Foster, who was very famous in his time. But anyway, he would paint seriously and enter shows. And one of the most important things a young up-and-coming artist can do is getting together a curriculum vitae that has teeth to it. In other words, that he's won awards in various competitions, has received honors such as Roger Kuntz did. But that wasn't enough to live on, what he sold. And he lived down in Mexico and was a little too fond of the bottle. A dear man, but just a little too fond. That's where the money went. And so he would paint for a big outfit which had a very large emporium on the ocean front next to the movie house. We won't mention names, but he would paint paintings for them. He would get pieces of tempered masonite from the lumber company, 12 inches by 24 inches. He would line up 30 or 40 in a line, and then paint in the foreground, and then the background, or then an interior, and then a pot here and a pot there, going all the way down. In other words, mass producing. And how much did he get for each work? $4. And by the time it was framed, it was sitting there in the window facing the ocean at $175. So you can see how some businesses in art, especially when they deal in mass production art, that is a peril. Don't buy it. Buy a print by a master rather than a junk art. This same thing is going on right now in China, and there are companies importing genuine oil paintings on canvas, probably on, not even on linen canvas, probably on cotton canvas. You don't want to buy a painting on cotton canvas, by the way. It doesn't last. You should always insist that your favorite artist in oil paints on linen. And so there are bad things. So you are not going to buy, I'm now talking to those who would be buyers, you're not going to buy because of fashion. You're not going to buy because other people are buying. You're not going to buy because it fits in with the decor. You're going to buy it because you like it and you love it. If it increases in price, as has, all we have to do is to look at Gene here at his enormous success, not through a desire to make money, because he's a very successful attorney, but because he just loves the stuff. But he's been well rewarded, and he will reward those that come after you, won't you?
Yeah, and you know, the slide that's on the screen right now is
this,
a party at
this
Gene's
was
house.
taken at Gene's house in Emerald Bay. And as we see on the left is Millard Sheets. He's the only one I failed to get in my gallery because he was tied up with an important gallery in Laguna Beach. And then there's Gene, just looking a little younger. When was this taken, Gene? 20 years ago?
I think 1840.
1840, okay, right. And then Phil Dyke, who was my favorite painter. His son, Woody Dyke, is a landscape architect and lives in San Clemente. Jane and Robert Wood. Jane survives as widow of Robert E. Wood, who was a brilliant transparent watercolorist. As you know, that most watercolor is transparent. It has not got any texture, any white in it. If it had white in it, it would be called gouache, and it would be opaque. But transparent watercolor bleeds into the paper, and of course the paper on which the watercolorist should paint, it should be made of rag. It should be rag paper, not wood pulp. Wood pulp, as you know, eventually stains, goes brown. And when you buy, those who buy books should note whether the book is printed on acid-free paper, which means sort of the equivalent of rag paper, or wood pulp. Rex Brandt, the Rex Brandt, he was just marvelous. And he and Phil Dyke both started out after leaving art school commercially. Rex Brandt started out as being the main illustrator for Ford Times. Phil Dyke worked with Disney on Fantasia. I remember that glorious movie. He did a lot of work there. And they were eventually able to break free and have a sufficient income from art sales. But as you have heard, art sales were very poor in the 30s and 40s. And now, almost, I think, they have gone to excess, because anything is saleable at the right price. So, am I saying that artists are charging too much? Yes, I think that they should adapt to, call them sketches, shall we say, and still offer the buying public an original artwork at a more reasonable price. Nowadays, you walk into the galleries here in Laguna. For instance, the Kleitches for sale here in Laguna start at $80,000. And the Kleitch sale at, as I told you, at Casa Camino in 1929 sold nothing. So the bad things are buying for the wrong reason. And so now we can get away from the lie factor and return to...
Richard, we got to stop now. People are leaving. We've talked too much.
Well, I think we do want to at least afford an opportunity for anybody who might have a question. Yes?
It wasn't a question. Richard, I wanted to let people know how much you did for the charities in Laguna in always being the auctioneer for art auctions that we would have, Children's Hospital of Orange County for a couple of years. And also, you appraised my paintings, of which I had a Roger Kuntz, who I adored, and I got it from the bank. Anyway, so that, and I have Ray Fries, etc. And after Raj died, you called and said, Barbara, I'm going to have to tell you, you're going to have to raise the value on your Richard Kuntz. Anyway, I did come into hard times, had to sell the painting in order to buy a car. And I want you to know, I bought a car with Roger's painting, thanks to you.
You are a dear. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
I enjoyed doing art auctions, especially for the Children's Home Society. And here comes up a difficult subject. Even 20, 30 years ago, artists, you would say, why do you always appeal to us? We don't make great incomes. We have a tough time making a living. And so when I gave an art auction, I insisted that the artist would get 60%. As you know, an art gallery normally charges 40% commission. If you're in New York, they charge 50% commission. But I did insist that the artists benefited at these art sales.
I want to acknowledge something to Richard that everybody
Could you
else...
speak into the mic? I'm a little
Yes.
deaf.
Is it turned
Okay.
on?
My name is Barbara Bing, and I've lived here a long time. And when Richard was first having his frame shop, he made 2 frames for me, very, very beautiful ones, for an unknown artist, and I still have them. And I would like to say that they have survived, and they're beautiful still. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Those
I
of-
was a
those of you may
perfectionist,
not,
so
know-
I never sent out anything that was bad. But I learned a lot in those first few weeks when literally I hadn't even made a picture frame, and Fern Gary came in and asked me to cut a mat, which was the first mat I ever cut.
Before
And she
Barbara...
was the curator.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I was going to say, before Barbara sits down, I should point out that she's the granddaughter of William Swift Daniel, and she does live in his home,
Yes.
his original home. So she certainly is probably got a wealth of history information that she could share with us at some point in time.
Anyway, finishing out the fact that you don't get rich being just an ordinary dealer, you have to go for the high stakes. I fortunately invested a little in real estate, and that is why I live on a little more than Social Security quite comfortably. Thank you very much. I would like to do one commercial. The NAE, the National Endowment for the Arts. They have a very modest position in the current budget that has been discussed in Congress, and they are asking for, I think, a $3 million increase. And when I tell you that our debt, I want to remind you all, when you spend money, is 14 trillion. Now, do you all know how many zeros there are in trillion? 12. 12 zeros. Imagine $1 and 12 zeros after it. It is so foolish that our government has led us into such dreadful debt. And I was brought up in Depression times that you only buy what you can afford. I think it probably would wreck the American economy, but it's something I strongly recommend.
Any other questions, perhaps? There's somebody. Yeah, sorry. Oh, dear.
Janet or someone in Janet or someone in the audience, where is that original pavilion located?
You know, Rick Balzer is in here. Yeah. It's a home on 571 Graceland.
Okay, and then Mr. Crane, I just wanted to, a couple of things, tell you a couple of things. Bud and Shirley Franklin say hello to you.
Bud and Shirley Franklin?
Bud and Shirley Franklin say hello to you.
Say hello to you.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
You remember them? From
Do
some
I
time
ever?
ago.
I took Shirley to the senior prom, and
I think you
I don't understand why, but she's never spoken to me since.
well, Bud ended up at Pomona, but Shirley did not. I'm not
No,
sure.
Shirley was a gorgeous girl, and Bud was a former judge in Newport Beach, and was 4 years ahead of me at Harbor, and 4 years ahead of me at Pomona College. Yeah,
Well, long live the Sagians. But listen, here's my final question. What is the plan for your collection?
I'm going to live forever.
Okay. All right. But you're an estate attorney. I figure
Oh,
you've probably thought this one out. The Lagoon Art Museum might be a recipient, or is that?
I've been talking with some people out at the Great Museum that is going in at Irvine. They may, I have no real plans. pray every night that my wife will survive me, then she can worry about it.
And she
Jean
actually
is going
thinks
to
the
live
other
to
thing.
102, I forecast. One other little thing that I had here as a note. My first show in about 1953 was I exhibited John McLaughlin's work, and also Leonard Kaplan, you may remember, who had his studio on Glenary Street. John McLaughlin, I had 8 paintings. The prices were $250 to $375. I didn't sell one. They are now on sale in New York at $80,000. So if you can wait 40 or 50 and you're lucky in your choice, you may do well. But I leave you with the thought that it's a lovely business to be in. You meet beautiful people. I was very seldom swindled. I would let people buy paintings on time and take the paintings away. My main idea was to get the painting out of the studio into people's hands, because when they had it, they didn't want to lose it. And so I've got to give one little compliment to Charlie, who comes down from Huntington Beach every day and opens the gallery. And it's lovely to know it's down there and still operating.
I was going to interject that, the photograph that you saw of the party at Jean and Diane Crane's home, they had several parties like that. And I came to work for Jean in 1981, so that's about the time I met Richard. And I went to a few of the openings, which were pretty festive openings at his gallery. An opening for Dyke, one for Brandt, and one for Robert E. Wood. And so he did a very good job of promoting the artists and, helping other people learn about them, which is what a good art gallerist should do, is definitely introduce the artists and give all the information that people need to have to make informed decisions about whether to purchase the art. And of course, Jean would definitely agree, and I agree, that you don't buy art as an investment, you buy it because you love it. And that's what Jean has done.
I keep hearing all that. Maybe I buy it because I love it now. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing. If you want to buy art, look. Every piece of art you will see that's worth anything is a comparison to something you've seen before. So the more you look, the more you're able to discern which is the piece that is the better quality of the two or the three. You learn. People have the magic eye. I suppose that happens. But I'll tell you, the really best way of looking at art is attending museums, attending shows, looking at great paintings, historically great paintings, and comparing. Your own mind will help you to compare. Don't just, as I said before, the only reason I bought art to begin with was because I almost literally fell in love with Brandt and his wife and Phil and Millard and all those people because they were so incredibly interesting. Just had a world of things to say. I would walk away full of anything and everything but art. I was up with Dyke one time at his home in Claremont on Forbes, and we were talking about that. We were getting philosophy and blah, 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 blah. It was getting kind of. Dyke finally said, Crane, when I get together with you, I talk about great issues and philosophies and all that stuff. He said, I get together with Brandt, and we talk about the price of paint. So there you are.
I have one little bit of useful information I can give you. Sometimes you own a painting that is worth many, many thousands of dollars, and you only paid a few hundred for it. And you decide to give it away as a tax advantage. And so I'm giving you the names of 3 certified appraisers. You don't want to take anybody's recommendation on the value of a painting, because the IRS are very strict in checking out the actual value of a painting, and you will get honest appraisals from these. Our local man is C. Boyd in Laguna at 494-1902. In Pasadena, who have art shows where you will find Rex Brandt's for sale occasionally, Phil Dykes, and they say that if the provenance, if the picture has the Chalice Gallery stamp on the back, and it always would, it was very easy to certify provenance. John Moran, that is in Pasadena, 626-793-1933. And then finally in San Clemente, Charlie recommends John McCloskey in San Clemente at 369-7231. And my last comments, as I see we're nearing, nobody seems to be sleeping yet, it's great, is look at the funny side of life. Try to see the ridiculousness of life. We're given anywhere up to 100 years, and then you're gone. And somebody else does all the worrying. So don't worry and don't get stressed. Stress is the killer, and somehow or other, the worrying times I've been through, it's all past, and I worry about nothing except getting back to bed, which is my favorite place. Thanks so much.
I think that it's fair to say that this 5th program in 2010 will go down in history as one in which we were visited by legends this evening. All 3 of them. Legend of the Laguna Museum, Janet Blake, and Gene Crane, and Richard Chalice, who I must admit I really so much look forward to coming down this evening, because I was one of the first non-Asian employees at Laguna Nursery in the 1960s, when Mr. Chalice's gallery was still pretty wet behind the ears. And I remember him scurrying around, and his daughter, when she was a young girl, as I was out behind the nursery watering the 5-gallon plants. In the audience as well, we have legends such as Mrs. Westfall, who wrote the 2-volume compendium on the history of plein air art in California, as Richard so rightfully pointed out, brought plein air art back into the mainstream of appreciation, and Barbara Bing as well, who came and so courageously spoke at the tall podium this evening. Thank you so much for coming. The Historical Society looks forward to anyone who is interested in joining. The annual membership is $15 per individual, $25 per household, or $50 per business. And we're located at 278 Ocean Avenue. We also very much appreciate the City of Laguna Beach for accommodating us this evening, the Cox Communications Company for broadcasting this program, and especially the efforts of Roger Kempler, who was essential in helping to put this program together this evening. Thank you.
I would like to add one more thing, which is that the director of Laguna Art Museum is in the audience, Bolton Colburn, and his wife, Susan Anderson, who Richard was speaking about earlier, who did the oral history for the Archives of American Art with Gene. And Susan is a foremost art historian and writer also about this California school group, among others. And if you come up to Laguna Art Museum right now, we just opened actually 5 exhibitions, rather ambitious programming. But we have John Paul Jones, who's someone who resided here and who was a very, very interesting, highly individualistic artist, and I think you'll enjoy that. We have Roscoe Schrader, who was one of the early Impressionist artists here and was the director and long time worked for Otis Art Institute. And upstairs, we have signature painters from La Papa, which is the Laguna Plein Air Painters Association. And in our lower level, we have some really interesting take on a modern approach by Sean Duffy. You really have to see it for yourself. We have a Jeep in the lobby right now that belongs to Sean. And also, in our Young Artist Society gallery, we put in the work of John Paul Jones' daughter, Megan. And sadly, Megan, who was very, very talented, died not too long before her 21st birthday from a rare form of kidney cancer. But you can go see those pieces in the Young Artist Society gallery, which is on the lower level. So, sorry, but I had to get a plug-in for Laguna Art Museum, which continues the tradition of the Laguna Beach Art Association. Thank you.
This is to make you laugh. Take it home and
You're a dear. Thank you so much.